The fine-tuning argument. There are 26 fundamental physical constants in the universe. These constants determine the strength and behavior of every particle, every force, every interaction, even the behavior of the fabric of space-time itself.
I'm not sure that we can know that. You know, it's possible that we can. I have heard similar things from a number of people, but I've also heard a number of people say that, yeah, it could have proceeded differently, but so what?
Hi, I'm Dr. Tim McGrew. I'm a Christian philosopher, and I enjoy building connections with people at Atheist Edge.
For all life as we know it, if the values of any of these physical constants had differed even slightly, the evolution of the universe itself would have proceeded very differently as well. For example, epsilon is the measure of fusion from hydrogen to helium. When four nucleons fuse into a helium, 0.7% of their mass is converted to energy. If this process yielded only 0.6% energy, only hydrogen would exist. It
The
gets,
only response I
oh,
would have would be, is it even possible? Is it possible that these things could be different? I don't know. Or are these conditions necessary conditions?
if the yield instead was 0.8%, even hydrogen would have fused seconds later after the Big Bang. The entire universe would be composed of a single element, hydrogen. And this would be a cosmos devoid of atoms entirely. Another example, the ratio of gravitational energy required to pull a large galaxy apart to the energy equivalent of its mass is 10 to the negative 5, also known as the Q constant. If this value were even a tiny bit less, no stars would have formed. A tiny bit more, the universe would be too violent for stars to even survive. And the same is true for all the rest of the 26 constants in the universe. Christian apologists such as Alvin Plantinga, William Lane Craig, Richard Swinburne, Alistair McGrath, and John Polkinghorne are quick to point out that the chances of all 26 dials to be so precisely tuned to allow for life are so infinitesimally small that it defies reason unless a supernatural intelligent agent did it.
Okay. First response is, if we are given infinite time, and if the universe had infinite chances of starting, then it doesn't matter how small the odds are of them coming together and being right. Eventually they will. It's a mathematical certainty that if a possibility exists and you have an infinite number of tries, then the one that works will happen.
Oh, that's a foreshadowing on some of my explanations and refutations later, but that's good.
I
You're,
got that from rationality rules.
we're on the same wavelength. Let's just say that. And to tell you the truth, I have no response to that. I've got nothing. Well, I say I have no response to that, but I actually have three possible explanations. But I admit all three of these are weak explanations. First, the multiverse theory. This universe is the only universe we know about. We have a sample size of exactly one universe. In science, sample size is crucial, so no real scientific conclusions can be reached about the nature of the universe unless we have other universes to compare it to. Studying other universes might show that these physical constants aren't as rare as one might think. The dial settings that we experience here in this universe might not be that uncommon, but actually possibly inevitable. But unfortunately, most physicists agree that the multiverse theory is an illegitimate topic of scientific inquiry. If it's not testable or observable, it's exactly as scientific as throwing your hands up and saying God did it. No more, no less.
Okay, but there's also the possibility that there have been multiple times when universes have tried to develop, the conditions weren't right, and so they did not. And that's kind of similar to what I said earlier, that when the conditions finally became right, then the universe did develop. Another possibility is that a universe could have developed under different conditions, but the life forms that would have resulted would have been completely different life forms. They might have been silicone-based life forms instead of carbon-based life forms. And if that had happened, we would be having the same argument, but under a completely different set of conditions. And we don't know that under a different set of conditions, a different set of life forms could have developed.
The second possible explanation is the WAP. No, not that WAP, the weak anthropic principle. This is the truism that the universe must be found to possess the properties necessary for the existence of observers. Any other possible universe that could not have produced life as we know it would, by definition, not be observable. Douglas Adams, in The Salmon of Doubt, sums up the WAP like this. This is rather as if you imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, this is an interesting world I find myself in. An interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it. This is such a powerful idea that as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as, gradually, the puddle gets smaller and smaller, frantically hanging on to the notion that everything's going to be all right, because this world was meant to have him in it. It was built to have him in it. So the moment he disappears, it catches him rather by surprise. I think this may be something we need to be on the watch out for.
So we think, so what did this person who made this world intend it for? And this is the point where you think, well, it fits me very well. You know, the caves and the forests and the stream and the mammoths. He must have made it for me.
If we weren't here to observe it, there could have been other universes where there was nothing there to observe it. The fact that we're here observing it, because if there were no life forms, there would be no observation. Of course, if there's observation, it's got to be perfectly tuned. Basically.
Oh,
Did
wait a
I
minute,
explain that
I
right?
don't see how that conclusion follows. If there were no life forms to observe it, it would still have happened, that we just wouldn't be talking about it.
It's kind of like a tree falling in the forest, doesn't make a sound. Like it kind of goes with the multiverse theory and the fact that or it doesn't even have to be a multiverse. This could be a one-time shot, but the fact that there are entities, intelligent agents in this universe observing it, if it were any other way, there would be no observation. The fact that we're here to observe it means, of course, we had to have come, the dials had to
I
have been
think
tuned
you've got an
perfectly.
error in logic there.
Oh, shoot. How so?
Okay, go through your points one at a time there.
Okay. The weak anthropic principle.
No, okay.
Yeah. That this is the truism that the universe must be found to possess the properties necessary for the existence of observers. Any other
Okay.
possible universe that could not have produced life would, by definition, not be observable. So if the dials were tuned differently, there, i.e., there wouldn't be life here to observe it. So this becomes philosophical and not so scientific,
Right.
really. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't observed, but does that mean it wasn't exist? If not being able to observe something means it doesn't exist, then God doesn't exist.
My third explanation, which is the weakest of the three, admittedly, we have become conditioned, biased even, to think that life must be carbon-based. Not surprising, since every plant and animal species we have ever known is carbon-based. Is it not possible, though, that a universe with different parameters could have spawned non-carbon-based life forms that were capable of reproduction? Such hypothetical life forms, based on our current understanding of biochemistry, include silicon biochemistry, other exotic element-based biochemistries, ammonia, methane and other hydrocarbons, hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen sulfide, silicon dioxide and silicates, or other solvents and co-solvents.
This might be something you get to later, but my big issue with the fine-tuning argument is that the universe is not fine-tuned for us. You know, look at how vast the universe is and how much of it can we survive on? One little tiny planet. And even within the one little tiny planet where we live, we can't even live on 80% of our own planet. We can't survive in those environments. So to argue that the whole universe is fine-tuned for us, I think that's getting a bit arrogant.
Yeah, isn't this 70% water? And we're land-based creatures. And then there's
Right.
the ice cap, the
Polar caps.
polar
Yep.
caps. And if you go maybe 30 clicks up, then you're not inside our little atmosphere bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a very small, just on this tiny little speck of dust. So there we are. If you thought this video was going to end with some surprise bombshell refutation of the fine-tuning argument, I'm sorry to disappoint you. As luck would have it, though, I am now going to point you to a friend of mine, Dr. Richard Carrier, and we'll see what he has to say on the subject. There are very, very much more hospitable universes to choose from among all logically possible universes available to an omnipotent builder. In fact, we will ourselves soon be building them within a time scale of mere centuries, a trivial delay in a universe of billions of years old. It's likely we'll be all living in utopian simverses that are entirely hospitable to life, and a far happier life too, provided we can overcome our own fallibilities. But gods are supposed to be infallible, so that can't have gotten in their way. Popular theisms already entail the same conclusion. Their gods, after all, knew how to build an eternal heaven that everyone insists will be a much better place. Indeed, these days, that's almost the entire emotional point of believing in gods in the first place. So theists admit there are vastly better designed, vastly more hospitable, vastly more suitable worlds to build. So they are facing a serious problem explaining why God didn't make ours one of those. Even Christopher Hitchens acknowledged that the fine-tuning argument was the best argument theists have, although he still found it unconvincing. His reason for finding it their best argument is that it at least pointed to a real thing that needed to be explained. And it did have a superficial appeal as long as you didn't look at it too closely. Whereas most of their arguments appeal to false facts or overt fallacies that can be exposed as fraudulent in a minute's time, his reasons for not finding it persuasive were twofold. One, it has never passed peer review in cosmological science, which is a bloody big red flag. And two, there is far more chaos, destruction, failure, and uninhabitability in the universe to actually conclude it is finely tuned. Hitchens is right on both points, but especially the latter. So like I said, I don't have a convincing refutation to the fine-tuning argument. I know a lot of my fellow atheists are going to have a problem with that. They might, I don't know. So there we are. I believe it's important to have the intellectual honesty to fairly evaluate opposing viewpoints and give credit where credit is due. For those believers watching this video, I invite you to do the same. Please post in the comments section with what you think is the best evidence for the non-existence of God. This would be a good chance for you to exercise your intellectual honesty as well. For me, the best evidence for the non-existence of God would be either divine hiddenness, the numerous errors in your holy book, or of course, the problem of suffering. One of those three. Those are pretty good evidences. But I want to know what you think. So let me know in the comment section. That's not to say, even though I think this is their best argument, just like Christopher Hitchens, I don't think it meets my acceptable criteria to start becoming a deist, at least. But it's a good argument.
I would definitely agree with you that those are the three top reasons for not believing in God. Two of them are what broke my faith. Divine hiddenness, although it's interesting because if you watch Stand to Reason's review of people responding to questions that he put out, 10 questions to atheists, when he does the review, he listens to mine and he says, okay, she describes the entire argument for divine hiddenness, but she's obviously never heard it because she doesn't have the vocabulary. And that's when I realized, okay, that's exactly what I was arguing. I just didn't realize that that was what the argument that I was making. And yeah, the Bible being filled with factual errors, that's what finally did it in breaking inerrancy for me. But the one other thing that I would bring up is when I listen to pastors who went to seminary, a number of them walk away from the faith after seminary when they discover just how much of our understanding of the Bible is based on guesswork. You know, we read this and we have this piece and we think this is what goes here and we think this is how it's supposed to be. And a lot of them walk away at that point, but too many of them are just, they're already married to this. You know, they've got jobs in this field. They can't walk away. And I have to wonder how many pastors actually believe what they preach. I know that a lot of the prosperity gospel preachers don't believe what they preach. But what about the mainline preachers? Do they actually even believe it? John Piper has a video that he put out near Christmas time about 2 years ago, which he discusses this very issue. And it's really interesting because he talks about how when he arrived for his postgraduate studies and he discovered how much of our understanding of the Bible is all based on guesswork. He says, I asked myself the question, how can we be asking people to devote their lives to guesswork?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, he at that point turns away from the question, changes the topic, and never answers the question.
Slippery fish.
Yeah, and I think that's where most pastors are. They realize that that's an issue, but it's a line they cannot cross. They simply say, I have to accept this on faith. I have to accept on faith that somehow this is right. And from that, they're able to move on. But that tells me they really have no basis for their faith.
When their crisis of faith gets to a critical mass, a breaking point, but they're already so invested, especially like it's their source of income. So sometimes they
Right.
just start faking the funk. I wonder how many are actually out there doing that.
Yes, yes, I would love to know that. And
Mhm.
it's something we cannot know.
Is this, do you think this is their strongest argument also, or do they maybe even have
I
a
would
stronger
agree
one?
that it's their strongest argument, but I don't find it convincing at all. Um, I can see why people don't lead with it because even though it's the best they've got, it really isn't something that's going to convince people. I think really the strongest selling point they have is the emotional appeal. And the closest anyone has ever come to drawing me back into the faith was through an emotional appeal. And because you can't overcome the objections to Christianity with reason. You cannot reason someone into the faith. I think the only way you can draw someone is through emotion.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that thumb and turn that red subscribe button gray if you like my content. And we will see you next time.